ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where we take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 1st of July, 2019, we are starting to look at the fourth story in the 16th season of Doctor Who, The Androids of Tara, starting with part 1. Now, the first interesting moment about The Androids of Tara is that it was written by David Fisher, who wrote The Stones of Blood, which was really, really good. Sadly, The Androids of Tara doesn't come out to nearly as good of a start. Mainly, this first episode feels like the Key to Time stuff was written at the very last minute, and this wasn't meant to be part of the key. Like, Fisher makes the mistake of having the segment of the fourth segment being found right at the beginning and revealed, so there's no reason for Romana or the Doctor to stay on Tara. They only stay because Romana gets captured, because they think she's an this Count Grendel thinks she's an android, and the plot is that the Prince Reinhardt of Tara needs to be crowned king, but Count Grendel is going to try to stop him, so they have an android that looks just like him that they're going to use as a distraction so he can be crowned king. That's the plot, which is, one of the big things people say is that it is the Prisoner of Zenda, and yeah, this is the premise of the Prisoner of Zenda, instead of androids, but with androids and in space. I guess, all I can say that the Prisoner of Zenda isn't nearly as popular in the US as it is, I guess, in the UK, so people perhaps wouldn't have read it. But perhaps what's the most interesting thing here is that as an episode, it feels like it's mostly padded out, just because it's like I had no reason to get the Doctor into the story, because the Doctor starts out this episode bored with his quest for the Key to Time, which, I guess it almost feels out of character for the Doctor to be like, ooh, I'm just gonna be bored. Yes, the Doctor is generally anti-authoritarian, but the idea is that, he doesn't want to bow to the White Guardian's authority, and he's not in a rush to see it assembled. Except the White Guardian made it pretty clear, and there's been that through line through the first 3 stories, that finding the segments of the Key to Time is really important because the universe needs it. It's one of those. It's a really weird. Just the story itself is weird. It does this whole. We have androids, so we build an android, and we have the android as basically, as our plot point. It also takes the Count way too long to realize that this mysterious woman he's found in the woods who has a swollen ankle isn't an android. It's a weird story. Overall, it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, we just have the entire story built around these androids in something that really isn't that interesting. The androids themselves are like, oh yeah, we have our character. It's not an interesting start. There's this, the Doctor spends most of the first episode asleep fishing because he's bored, and that's kind of odd. Now you have some good stuff here. There's some nice political intrigue, but that only happens after the 12-minute mark, and the cliffhanger is really solid, where everyone is drugged, um, on the prince's side, for nefarious purposes, in a genuinely nicely directed sequence. This episode was directed by Michael Hayes in his first of 3 stories that he will be directing, and he does a great job. Um, he does a great job as director. He knows exactly how to he knows how to set up shots, and basically he's really good at shooting our characters and giving it enough. He, outside of, well, the Taran Wood Beast, which is a guy in a bear costume with a silly mask, like it's one of the weirdest things. It comes out of nowhere, and it feels like, oh, we're supposed to be taking this seriously, because it's a story we needed to have a Doctor Who monster. Like, it's very clear that this story is setting itself up just to have human villains, which is, perfectly fine. Doctor Who can work very well with just human villains. You don't always need an alien threat. But it's like Doctor Who. It's one of those things where, like, Doctor Who needs a monster, so here's a monster for this first episode to get the plot going. Even though the plot, there are probably other ways you could have actually gotten the plot going. It's it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, here's the plot we've got. Other than that, we've got you have the entire the entire story. The entire story is just built around this plot, and it starts off on a weak foundation. It's a good episode. It's perfectly fun. It's fun. It's campy. The plot is derivative but not bad, and the android twists are quite. Having the android twists are nice enough. It just, as a story, it kind of fails to capture interest. It's just sort of like, oh, we're doing a story that is very derivative. So overall, I'm going to give The Androids of Tara Part 1 a 7 out of 10. It is the 2nd of July, 2019, and I just finished watching Part 2 of The Androids of Tara, where very little actually happens. The story's taken a dive. The big reveal is that the actual prince is kidnapped, and once again, because the prince doesn't show up at the quote-unquote appointed hour for his coronation, then the Archimandrake, who is the man who coronates, does the coronating, well, he'll have to choose someone else, which is a really weird idea for a line of succession based on, oh, you didn't show up, that means you don't get to be king. Which is just, it's weird. It's like you have an opposite person, like someone completely outside of the normal sort of royalty choose who gets to be king, which is just it's just that in and of itself is a weird way of choosing your king. Like it feels like it should be maybe it should be one of those things that you get a different a different person to do. You don't deal with, like, you, or maybe you vote on it. But yeah, that's how Count Grendel is gonna become king. Um, but oddly enough, uh, the doctor comes up on a good plan of, well, why don't we just use the android, have him be crowned king? Why not? And then you nobles can search for the king um, whilst the, whilst while the, um, while the real king is gone. So there's no problem, and a lot of the episode is just building up to the coronation, and we get to the coronation. He's coronated, and then in walks Princess Strella to swear fealty. Who, the big twist is, she looks just like Romana. Um, but what's really interesting here is, so it's like, oh, we'll have her, and um, we'll have her and Romana switch places. Romana will swear fealty, and we'll send her. Um, but then she swears fealty. Then the doctor says no and attacks her, which is just. I'm sorry. That's just a really, really weird. It's a really, really weird, just sort of ending. Like, it doesn't know what it's doing. The princess doesn't get any characterization. It's just she looks like Romana. And at the end of part 2, it feels like it should be going for some big, we're doing a political machination story. We're doing a lot of big stuff, but really, it's one of those stories where the plot doesn't quite end very well. Um, it's a story, and it's just like, yeah, it sort of stopped. Overall, there's just a lot of stuff in the middle of wandering around. It feels, now the direction is nice. Michael Hayes does a good job of making the shots interesting, but a lot of the we're sneaking around shots out in the nature, it feels like it's just being like, oh look, we have a really cool landscape to film in, so let's film in this really cool landscape, instead of trying to build a story around the area. It's a lot of stuff that you could really cut a lot of this. You could really cut a lot of this episode out, and you wouldn't miss much. You would just, it would just be like, oh, it's a little shorter than usual, instead of, necessarily being the regular style story. It's it's a story that's just like, oh, we didn't have that much. It almost feels like they didn't really have much here. Again, you have the segment already being found, so that's not there to be kept on. So it's just sort of like, oh, it's here. So overall, this is honestly the first episode of this season to be out and out just bad. So overall, I'm going to give The Androids of Tara Part 2 a 4 out of 10. It is the 2nd of July 2019, and I just finished watching Part 3 of The Androids of Tara. Part 3 of The Androids of Tara is a little bit better than Part 2, mainly because it has things going on. It's basically the Doctor tries to rescue Romana, and tries to fix the android prince/king. And basically, it's like the Grendel obviously realizes, oh yeah, that the king must be an android. That's the only logical explanation as to why he has, why he's done what he's done. As a character, uh, it is a lot of fun. He is very much a fun character, but sadly, unlike much of the story, there's so much padding here. Like you have an entire, basically the entire story builds itself up around, basically around a plot that just, it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. It's doing a lot of stuff to try and give us a jump to a conclusion, but you have Romana escape and be captured now, and like the big cliffhanger is her being rode off, being dragged away on a horse, which, is a good cliffhanger. It's fun enough, but it's not necessarily one of the best. It's not one of the best stories overall, mainly because it's just sort of, it's sort of done as a, we build this plot, and as we build this plot, you're supposed to have a good sense on, not only who the villain is, and how sort of everything is. Yeah, it's being really, really good. A really good story, but overall, this episode kind of comes out as average. It's a story that builds that builds up to basically be to basically try to be a complete adventure, but it doesn't do lots with the third episode. It's again, it's just more of the same sort of, look, we're building up the mystery, and look, we're building up the idea that everything is dangerous. It's something that, really, it's something that you really kind of get the feeling that you could perhaps be cutting out most of this episode still, but Tom Baker's nice, John Leeson's nice. The best parts are this extended sequence where the Count has an assassin evil android Romana now, so there's another 3 Mary Tam lookalikes running around. Has her attack and try to kill the doctor, and then he has his men fire on the doctor. Which is a very fun scene, and it's as a scene, it's good enough that you get at least some interesting, you get some interesting stuff there. You get the fun characters. You get a good sense that this is a plot that at least has some good ideas, but overall, it sort of is a mediocre episode, because once again, you already had the actual segment of the key to time being found early on in in the first episode, and you have, uh, and you have, you've already, and you really have not much for what the story really where the story can go, or perhaps should be going. It's just we've just been given kind of an average episode. So overall, I'm going to give The Androids of Tara Part 3 a 5 out of 10. Alright, it is the 3rd of July 2019, and I just finished watching Part 4 of The Androids of Tara. Now, Part 4 of The Androids of Tara is actually good. It's a decent conclusion. I can't believe David Fisher actually was able to wrangle something decent out after the middle episodes just lost their way. There's obviously no reason for Rwanda to escape and then be captured again, to then have, other than I guess it's trying to make her a more proactive character in events, which, makes sense. This is a show where you want to try to have characters who are, who are proactive and doing things, even if they, they don't. But it just, having her escape to be captured again doesn't quite work. Maybe they should have had her escape at the very end and meet up with the doctor. So, you didn't really need rescuing. That might have been better. But as it stands now, this episode was actually enjoyable. The biggest issue here is that there's this big middle set piece of a sword fight where you really notice the lack of music. Like, you had Dudley Simpson scoring this story to decent effect. Like, a lot of the dull scenes in the middle two episodes were decently improved by Simpson's score and Simpson writing in enough music to sort of give you that sense of, okay, we're going places and we're at least doing something. Whereas this big, what's supposed to be this big set piece, the big climax, is just, there's like one section in the middle that gets a score. Other than that, it's just like, nope, we're not actually giving this a score. We're just sort of, we're just doing it. We just gave it a little bit of time. You know, we didn't give, we didn't give it, we didn't do enough. We basically didn't give it the time that it needed to be a good score. It's one that just, didn't quite, it's a scene that just didn't work well. It's one where it sort of failed almost miserably. It kind of wrote itself into a corner just a little bit. It was there to try its hardest. Like, the characters tried. Also, oddly enough, this is a story where no one survives. We actually get to meet Princess Strella here, and she's a fine character. She and Romana have some really good stuff. When the doctor comes in, they get there's a really good scene between the three of them. But it's kind of just a minor, we did this quick little scene, so we're moving on. We focused a lot on building up these characters and building up these moments. It was very much here's a quick scene, okay, we're moving on now. And of course, everything's ended, and we end on a nice joke of K9 being left in the river. Like, there's this great stuff at the beginning where the Doctor and K9 sneak into Grendel's castle, basically, basically through the moat, and not through like an actual, like, not through the actual, front door, so they can raid the castle. And the actual fencing scene, it's full of witty dialogue. It's genuinely a scene that almost needed music the way it was shot, to sort of enhance things. It's that sort of problem where, yeah, you don't want music to be overpowering, but also there are points where you just need the music to give something, or else because you really just hear the clattering of the swords as they, bounce off each other, which wasn't necessarily bad. It's just like, oh, is that it? That's all we're hearing here. We're not hearing like the actual big score. It's genuinely quite sad. And just as plots go, it didn't work well. Now it's like, what's great is you had Cyril Shaps as the Archimandrite in what I think is his last Doctor Who role. He was in Tomb of the Cybermen, Planet of the Spiders. He's been in Who before. He usually plays the sniveling character, and here he gets a nice dramatic part as the priest, and he's a lot of fun. A lot of stuff in the story is really, it's really, really solid, and it's a really, really good adventure. So it's solid. It's got the problems again. The problem is the lack of music really drags down, and it's still fairly plotting, but it's a good episode. It's decent. It's above average. It's okay. It's nothing too special, but nothing inherently bad. So overall, I'm going to give The Androids of Tara Part 4 a 6 out of 10. And we average out the scores to give The Androids of Tara a final score of 5.5 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I always like to interact. I always read the comments, and I like to interact with my viewers. And join me next time we take a look at the penultimate story in Season 16, the search for the 5th segment of the Key to Time in The Power of KROLL.